joining, and thanks for the introduction, Karen. My name is Michael Friis, and I'm a product manager at Docker. And I've been working with a bunch of people at Docker on Docker Community Edition and Enterprise Edition for a couple of months. And we announced that last week. So in this webinar, I'll be going over some of the details of the launch. Once I've done that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So kind of to give you a high-level summary, we announced two new products, Docker Enterprise Edition and Docker Community Edition. So Enterprise Edition is kind of it's a modern app platform for containerized apps that runs on any infrastructure. And the important thing with Docker Enterprise Edition is that it's certified, so we certify and make sure that it runs really well on the infrastructure that we support. And then we also provide certified content that runs on top of the Docker Enterprise Edition platform. So that's both plugins that extend and enhance Docker, and then it's certified container image content that you can run on top of Docker Enterprise Edition. Then there's Docker Community Edition, which is kind of the free open source version of Docker. That's great for dev and ops that want to kind of roll their own setup and maintain it. So Docker's evolution as a platform kind of started with Linux developer community, right? So Docker was originally just a way for developers to containerize and better manage development of their apps in an easy manner, and then it grew from there to include way more. So the situation today is that Docker is more of a platform, which means that Docker means different things to different people. There's still a huge developer community segment that appreciates Docker for just making their day-to-day development easier. And then Docker is also used heavily by ops for building reliable CI and CD pipelines and to reliably run apps in production at scale. Increasingly, Docker is also used by enterprises to run business-critical apps in big enterprise companies. And then Docker is also growing a huge kind of partner ecosystem that plug into the Docker platform, both with kind of software that runs on top of the platform, and then we also have a bunch of partners that provide infrastructure that Docker runs on. Just to kind of talk about Enterprise Edition and Community Edition side by side. Enterprise Edition is a paid subscription, and it comes with a full container as a service enabled platform. So it has orchestration, management, and security. And it comes supported by Docker Inc. So if you buy an Enterprise Edition subscription and you encounter a problem running Docker, then you can call or email Docker and we'll help you figure it out. I'll get into the details of the release cadences later, but Docker Enterprise Edition is released quarterly, so there's a release every quarter, and each release is currently supported for 1 year. And when we say supported, it both means that you can call us and get help, but it also means that each of those quarterly releases for a full year will backport patches and security fixes so that you can keep running the same version in a secure manner, fully patched. And then, as mentioned, we certify Docker Enterprise Edition on set of infrastructures and operating systems, and there's a bunch of certified plugins and containers that you can run on top of it. Community Edition is free, so it doesn't require any subscription or even a Docker login. You can just start using it. There's two variants. I'll get into the details of that. There's a monthly Edge release, so that's great great if you're a developer or you're an ops person and you just want the latest and greatest from Docker. You can get a new drop every month. And then we also do quarterly releases similar to Enterprise Edition so if you want a slightly more stable setup with fewer upgrades. So just to step back a little bit and go through what an edition is. So a Docker edition it's a product that's built by Docker. The example here is Docker for AWS. And the idea with a Docker edition is that we built a great way to run the Docker platform on a particular set of infrastructure, in this case, Amazon Web Services. And the idea is to take away all the hassle of setting up Docker on that particular infrastructure and figuring out how to run Docker in an optimal fashion. And we also take care of upgrades and updates and all this stuff, so you don't have to worry about figuring out how to update from one Docker version to the next. We provide that as a product. So the diagram just kind of shows Docker running on top of Amazon Web Services, trying to manage all the details of configuring Amazon correctly to run Docker. Docker Community Edition is available for Mac and for Windows 10. So if you know Docker, those are basically the Docker for Mac and Windows that you know and love. Docker Community Edition is also available for AWS and Azure. And then we ship packages for Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, and CentOS. And then if you're running Windows Server 2016, Docker Enterprise Edition is available at no extra cost for Windows Server 2016. So if you saw the announcement, you probably noticed that there's a new versioning scheme for Docker. So because this is such a big change in how we ship Docker, we decided to kind of emphasize that with a new versioning scheme. And so the release last week was 17.03, and that's the first release. So the versioning scheme is similar to what Canonical uses for Ubuntu. So it's basically a year and a month. And since this is March, the first release was 17.03. Outside of the versioning, there wasn't any major change to the platform itself. So 17.03 has a bunch of bug fixes and improvements from Docker 1.13.1, but there's no breaking changes. And the API version of the platform is the same. It's 1.26. And basically, before we made this change, we spent a lot of time making sure that different versions of Docker were backwards compatible and didn't break. And that commitment still stands. Basically, if you find a breaking change between two Docker versions and it's not documented and it's not because it's something that we deprecated, that's a bug, and you should report it and we'll fix it. So the same commitment to backwards compatibility stands. So for Docker CE, as I mentioned, there are two variants. There's Edge, which is a monthly release. So 17.03 was the first one. The next one will be 17.04. Basically, every month we're going to do a drop of Edge for all of the infrastructure that I mentioned that Docker CE supports: Mac, Windows, AWS, Azure, and the different Linux distros. So that's great if you just want access to the latest features, but it does mean that you have to upgrade every month. Docker CE stable is if you don't want to have as many upgrades. And stable is basically released quarterly. And the neat thing about stable, which is actually an improvement on the previous release train, is that each quarterly release is supported for 4 months, which means that there's a new 1-month window that you can where you can update. or you could potentially stay for a month on the old version, and the old version is still patched and hotfixed for that month. Previously, whenever Docker did a major release, so for example, when we went from 1.12 to 1.13, we dropped support for 1.12 and no longer ship updates for 1.12 as soon as there's a new version available. So with this, there's a 1 month overlap that improves kind of the maintainability of the stable. Another great thing about the new versioning is that previously it wasn't really deterministic when Docker would do a new release, which was sometimes frustrating for partners or contributors to the Docker project because they had some features that they really wanted to ship, and it had been merged into the Docker project, but it was unclear when Docker was going to do a release that included that feature. That lack of clarity goes away now. So basically, if you contribute to the Docker project and your pull request is merged, you're guaranteed that it'll be in Edge users' hands within a month, because that release train just runs like clockwork. And also, you'll know that at most 3 months it'll be in the stable release. So it's way more deterministic, and it's easier for partners and contributors to plan when their enhancements will show up in Docker products. And it's great for us internally at Docker, also of course, because different teams at Docker can know when stuff will ship. This is just to show how the lifecycle works. So you can see at the top you have Docker CE, that's Edge and stable, and Edge just shows up every month. And then you can see stable with overlapping maintenance window. So the maintenance window of 1703 will overlap with that of 1706, and so on with 1709. And at the bottom, enterprise edition releases are supported for a full year. And the reason we did this was because we got feedback both from people who wanted access to new Docker features faster, which is now possible with the Edge release, and we also had feedback from people that wanted greater stability, which is now available in the stable channel. So moving on from Community Edition to Enterprise Edition. For Enterprise Edition, there's a Docker Certified program, which means that we certify Docker on different infrastructure that you can see on the left. So both Docker for AWS and Docker for Azure come in Enterprise Edition versions that are certified. And we also ship certified Docker Enterprise Edition for SUSE, Ubuntu, Red Hat, CentOS, and Oracle, and Windows Server 2016, of course, in collaboration with Microsoft. On top of Docker Enterprise Edition, you can get certified plugins and certified containers, and those are available in Docker Store. So you can go find them on Docker Store, which we also revamped for this launch, and then just install it from there. For certified content, this just gives an overview of the partners that we launched with, and we'll be adding more partners. If you're interested in becoming a partner or shipping certified content on Docker Store, there's a link in the blog post to the docs describing how to go about that. So for Docker Enterprise Edition, there's 3 different subscriptions. There's Enterprise Edition Basic, which is just kind of the basic Docker platform with certification, of course. Then there's Docker Enterprise Edition Standard, which is what we used to call Docker Data Center. So that comes with Docker Universal Control Plane, which has kind of user and image management, and a bunch of other great stuff. and finally, there's Enterprise Edition Advanced, which on top of standard adds kind of on-prem security scanning and vulnerability monitoring for Docker images. If you're interested in purchasing Docker Enterprise Edition, it's available from the Docker sales team. You can just go buy it with a credit card on Docker Store. And we also have a bunch of resellers, authorized resellers. Or you can get it from Microsoft, IBM, Cloudera, Canonical, Hewlett-Packard, and Alibaba. We're also making Docker Enterprise Edition available in the AWS and Azure marketplaces, so you can buy it directly from those marketplaces if that's how you prefer to consume software. Yeah, and as I mentioned, we completely revamped Docker Store for this launch. So Docker Store has all the content that you know and love from Docker Hub. It's also a place to download Docker Community Edition, so no sign-up required. You can just go download Docker for Mac Windows from the Docker Store. And it's where you can purchase a Docker Enterprise Edition, and it's also where you get plugins for both Docker Enterprise Edition and Community Edition. And for all the purchases you make from Docker, whether you buy it with a credit card on Docker Store or whether you get it through the sales team or through a partner, the Docker Store backend is where you can kind of get an overview of your subscriptions and links to how to download the software that you purchased from Docker. Yep, so just to wrap up, Docker's a platform, and we target a bunch of different constituencies, both developers and IT, Linux or Windows, and you can run Docker on-prem in your own data center or in the cloud on AWS, Azure, and other places. And we're also building this whole ecosystem of partners that provide certified content on Docker that extends and improves Docker. Yeah, so that's kind of all I have. So I'm happy to answer questions if there's any questions online. Okay, so there's a question about using Docker Cloud with paid repositories. And the question is whether this will still be available. It absolutely will still be available. So I should just cover this. So if you currently either use Docker Cloud or paid services on Docker Cloud, or you've purchased a license for Docker Data Center or Docker commercially supported engine, all that stuff will keep working. And for Docker commercially supported customers, we'll be transitioning. You can still use a commercially supported engine in whatever version you currently have, but your subscription will carry over to Docker Enterprise Edition. So you can, if you want, you can start upgrading now. And for Docker Cloud in particular, those services you can still use. Both the security scanning and the auto builds and the private repos, you can use those with either Docker Community Edition or Docker Enterprise Edition. No problem at all. Is Docker CE for Mac, Windows released under an open source license or proprietary license? So Docker for Mac and Windows are based on the open source Docker project, and obviously contain the Docker platform, which is open source. They also contain some proprietary components, though, that are not open source. So the kind of what we try to do with those components is that some of them make sense as open source projects. So actually, we spun out a bunch of the components that used to be proprietary in Docker for Mac and Windows and made them open source projects. VPN kit and a couple of others that are kind of healthy open source projects now, and they are components that go into Docker for Mac and Windows. So you can grab those and reuse them in other projects or contribute if there's something that you want to change. What's the difference between a certified image and an official image on Docker? That's a great question. We're still working out the details of what this means, and certainly for some of the images that are currently official images, we'll be certifying those, and they'll be certified images. But yeah, the official image program still exists on Docker Hub, and we're still maintaining that set of images on Docker Hub, and you can go fetch them there. Will the official images from Hub still only be there or replicated on EE? So all of the official images, basically all the content on Docker Hub is also visible on Docker Store if you search for it. And Docker Hub is not going to go away. All the content that that's there will still be available either on Docker Hub or on Docker Store for free. And then, as mentioned, we'll also be figuring out what parts of the official images we're going to certify and present as certified content on Docker Store. Can you talk about what goes into getting containers, infrastructure, and plugins certified? Well, so I don't have all the details. We should point you guys to the documentation for that afterwards. But basically, we have a partner team that runs this process, and there's a set of standardized tests and checks that we run certified content through. Yeah, I think we should probably do a separate webinar with people who are interested in partnering on this, and it's also documented on the Docker Knowledge Hub. Where can we get Docker certified containers? They're available on store.docker.com, and there's a link for certified containers. Do you have any guidelines or reference architectures on the following topics? CI/CD, security container monitoring for EE. I'm pretty sure we have white papers on a bunch of this. We should follow up after the webinar. Mm-hmm. I think you can find it on success.docker.com. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so if you go, I'm still sharing my screen, I think. If you go to success.docker.com, there's a bunch of white papers and reference architecture that you can find. Do you list pricing for subscriptions? Yes, they're listed on Docker Store. So you can see what the per node price for the different tiers of Docker Enterprise Editions are. Or you can give Docker Sales a call, and they can help you get you set up. Any plans to extend support for Windows Server for CE and or other versions than Windows Server 2016? Yeah, so I want to. So I spent a lot of time working on Windows Docker support for Windows. I want to emphasize this. If you're a licensed customer of Microsoft and you have access to Windows Server 2016, Docker Enterprise Edition comes at no additional cost with your Windows license. So if you currently have Windows Server 2016, you can just go install Docker Enterprise Edition for Windows Server 2016, and you don't have to pay either Microsoft or Docker any additional money. So that's the agreement that we have with Microsoft. So that kind of solves. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't really need Docker Community Edition on Windows Server 2016 because you get Enterprise Edition at no extra cost from Microsoft and Docker. And just to the second half of the question was whether we're looking at supporting other versions of Windows. Basically, for Docker to work on Windows, it has to run. We have to have access to a recent kernel, to a recent Windows kernel, and those new kernel versions are only available on Windows 10 Anniversary Edition and forward, and on Windows Server 2016. So it's not really possible to make Docker Engine run natively on, say, Windows Server 2012 R2 because the containerization primitives required for Docker to work are just not in the kernel on older versions of Windows. Okay, next question. Docker EE is included with Windows Server 2016 ? Which version? It's the basic version. Yeah. I'm running the latest CE version 17.3.0 CE Mac 2 and just noticed the running Docker Engine icon menu choices for my account. Yeah. Yeah, so if, let me start Docker so I can show the rest of the audience. Yeah, if you notice that your kind of tray icon for Docker on Mac or Windows now has a bunch of different options. It's a feature that we started rolling out last Friday. That was a blog post, so if you go to blog.docker.com, you can read about it. Borja has a great blog post with details. So it's basically a Docker Cloud integration. So if you run any Docker Swarm, really, whether that's on AWS, Azure, or Google, or any place else, you can take that swarm and you can register it with Docker Cloud, and then you can access it super easy from Docker for Mac or Windows, or you can also share access to it with other Docker IDs using the kind of orgs feature on Docker Cloud. And we're also trying to bring more of the Docker Cloud features into the Docker for Mac and Windows UI. So it's easy to access and integrate it from Docker for Mac and Windows. So yeah, you can see here on my, you can see what the question is talking about. I can list my repositories and my swarms from Docker for Windows in this case. And you can see I'm actually testing some stuff on Google. So I registered a swarm on Google Compute Platform. And I can, if I click that, I just get a prompt, and I can do Docker node ls, and I can start using the swarm directly without having to like SSH into a manager or set up a SSH tunnel or do other stuff. I can just use it directly from my laptop. So we're trying to get that better integrated, and I think this is a pretty good step. So that's what you're seeing in Docker for Mac and Windows, and you can go read the blog post from last Friday. It has all the details. You said SUSE Linux Enterprise Server is supported infrastructure. SUSE also ships RPMs for Docker with the container module. Will there be a difference? Yeah, so, I mean, a bunch of Linux vendors are shipping the Docker open source project. And that's kind of their way of packaging up the Docker open source project. It's not supported by Docker though, and it's definitely different than the one that we ship. Often some of the Linux distros packages are typically they're old versions of Docker. And they may also have settings or config that's not optimal, or that constrains what you can do with Docker using that package. So we recommend using the packages that Docker ship, both because you always get access to the latest and greatest version of Docker, and it's supported by Docker Inc. And with the people building Docker. Is Docker Hub going to be retired? Not. We're kind of trying to transition to Docker Store, but at least for the kind of community content. But all the features are still going to be there. The pricing is not going to change, so don't worry. I don't have all the details because I'm not on the team that runs Docker Hub or Docker Store, but kind of just to underscore it, all the features are still going to be there, and nothing is changing about pricing or anything, so don't worry. How does the Docker EE subscription integrate into Kubernetes? What is the benefit? Doing inside an offline environment. So for Docker EE, so Docker ships with its own orchestrator, Docker Swarm. It's built in. But if you rather want to use Kubernetes, that's great. You can still purchase a Docker subscription for Docker Enterprise Edition and then run Kubernetes on top of that. So then what will happen is that Docker support can help you run kind of the Docker part of that setup, but you'll have to figure out any problems with Kubernetes and so on. But lots of people are already doing that. They're buying supported versions of Docker and running that, and then they run Kubernetes or Mesos on top. And we think that's great, and we're happy to help you support that. What is the licensing for Docker 112.x Docker deployments on Red Hat systems in enterprise? Will those count as CE, or will we be expected to license those hosts ASAP? So, I mean, I think it depends. If you're running no, the answer is no. You're not expected to change the licensing. If you want support from Docker, as in the ability to send us emails or get a support person out to come help you debug problems, then you'll have to purchase a version that's supported by Docker Inc. But if you're running, like if you packaged up the open source Docker project and you're running that on your Red Hat system right now, like you can still do that. That's great. No problem. For developing testing, does it make sense to deploy on Docker CE even though you know the customer is going to be on Docker EE? So yes, that makes sense. From a functional standpoint, Docker CE and EE is compatible. So you can absolutely develop plugins and container content and test and all this stuff on Docker CE, and be confident that that stuff will also run on Docker EE. No problem. How long will Docker CS 113 be supported? I don't actually know. It's supported for, I think we announced this actually. It's also on the success.docker.com or the Docker Knowledge Hub. Basically, all our previous commitments to Docker commercially supported engines still stand, and there's a support matrix published somewhere on, I think, success.docker.com that has all the details. But yeah, just to emphasize it, if you're a current Docker commercially supported engine customer, that support and that subscription and license is still valid, and will support you based on our previous commitments and or until you upgrade to Docker Enterprise Edition, in which case we'll support you for a year for each version. Will scans be done on Docker certified images and be visible to the public like by Docker images are? Yes, that's part of the certification process. So if you're a partner and you submit content for certification by Docker, one of the checks that we do, in addition to a bunch of other checks, is that we scan the image and make sure that all the software is current and without security problems. Will security and patches be available to CE at the same time as the EE version? Yes. Yeah, those we maintain those with the same commitment, basically. So yeah, and if we find an exploit or a security fix, we'll publish at the same time for CE and EE. Absolutely. For a dev organization, do we need to buy license for developing on Docker EE? If you're using Docker CE version for your development efforts, you don't have to buy a license. You can still develop stuff that will be deployed or that will eventually run on Docker Enterprise Edition. You can develop that on Docker Community Edition, yeah, that's absolutely supported. So then it's up to you. Like if you'll want support for your for your test or staging setup, then you should consider running Docker Enterprise Edition on your test and staging setup too, in addition to production. But that's up to you. What does Docker EE with the shop, etc. mean? Is there a future for Linux distributions besides CoreOS? It's a big question. I think, yeah, I don't have a good answer to this question. I think there's still a bunch of value in what Linux distributions do. So, yeah, if you have a Linux distro that you're really happy about, you can still use that and run Docker on top of it. Yeah. I'm on Google Computer Engine running CoreOS and currently use Docker Cloud. If I would like to use certified images, should I get the basic EE subscription, which doesn't have security scanning, then use my Docker Cloud for scanning? Yep, that would still work. The kind of advanced tier of Docker Enterprise Edition is very much meant for people who want basically want all the stuff on-prem or within a setup that they fully manage. So if you're happy with Docker Cloud, you can absolutely still use that and integrate that with your Docker deployments however you want. No problem. Any additional support for VMware Photon? Any more integration? Goal would be to run containers on the hypervisor versus OS. Yeah, we're definitely talking to VMware. There's also support now for building. So if you look at GitHub in the Docker repo, there's support now in Contrib for building the Docker engine for Photon. Yeah, we're working with VMware, but we don't have anything to announce right now. In future, is it possible that Docker engine in Docker CE and Docker EE would have different code or have different performance? We don't have concrete plans to change that. Right now, the differentiation is primarily the support and the certification. So yeah, we don't have plans to try to make, yeah, so yeah, I should actually say that, underline that. Like, we don't have plans to make Docker Community Edition any worse or take features away. All the stuff that you can do with Docker Community Edition, all the stuff you could do with previous versions of Docker, you can still do with Community Edition. It's just as good, if not better, than the Docker that you were using 2 weeks ago. On Red Hat and CentOS, I've noticed that you have changed the default storage driver from device mapper to overlay. I don't actually know, but I'm happy to forward that question. If you want, maybe you can answer the question in, you can ask the question in the community Slack channel. And then you can just ping me. I'm Michael Friis or Friism in the Docker community Slack, and then I'll ping somebody to help answer that question. Do you have a comparison between Docker EE, Kubernetes, and Mesos that can help understand what features overlap and why we should choose one versus the other? I'm sure we have documentation on that. Yeah, we can follow up after the meetup. I'm not an expert on the detailed features of those 3 solutions. The discount for educational orgs that want to use EE. I don't know if we have a formal program, but reach out and maybe we can figure out something. Okay, John, a bit late. Can you please share the differentiator slides? I think we'll share the full presentation after the meetup, so you can go look at it.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. So it looks like